Hi, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Oren Elimelech. I'm the CISO at Atera, and I'll be moderating your next panel, which will discuss the ever-evolving threat landscape businesses face today and what can you do to better protect against any circumstances. Whether you're a cybersecurity firm providing services or an IT team looking to better protect yourself, or just looking for cybersecurity best practices, this is the panel for you. I'm joined by a wonderful team of speakers, including Itzik Tzalaf, Microsoft National Security Officer, Heather Ceylan, Zoom Deputy CISO, and Mark Bowling, Chief Information Risk Security Officer from ExtraHop. Ready, everyone? So, dear panelists, quickly introduce yourself and tell us more about your current roles and responsibilities. Heather, would you like to begin?
Sure, nice to meet everyone. My name is Heather Ceylan. I'm the Deputy CISO at Zoom, and in that role, I also oversee our security, governance, risk, and compliance function. Prior to Zoom, I worked at a healthcare technology company, and prior to that, I worked at PwC for 10 years doing cybersecurity and privacy consulting.
Thank you. Itzik?
So hi everyone, my name is Itzik Tzalaf. I'm the National Security Officer of Microsoft Israel. I'm 9 years at Microsoft. In my role, I'm focusing on national security. Israel is obviously one of the most challenging countries in the domain of cybersecurity. Therefore, for Microsoft and in my role, it's a unique opportunity to work and engage with the local government, regulators, strategic customers, and partners on cybersecurity, privacy, resiliency. And again, in my role, focus on national security, which means working with the national organization, but also with the local market from SMB organization and enterprises.
Thank you, Itzik. Mark?
Hey, thank you very much, Oren. And it's nice to meet everybody out there. My name is Mark Bowling. I'm the Chief Risk, Security, and Information Security Officer at ExtraHop Networks. I'm responsible for all aspects of corporate, physical, facility security, as well as all areas associated with information security. I'm also responsible for all risk management elements, including risk, governance, compliance. Thank you very much, Oren.
Thank you, Mark. So I'd like to kick off with a general question regarding the current landscape and what you are all seeing from where we are sitting today. Itzik, would you like to start?
So we all hear about the legendary or famous or sophisticated cyber attack, but the fact is that if I want to focus on what organizations I really need to focus on protecting themselves, so from our analysis, and we are publishing a yearly report on what happens on the world, from our research on that, between 85 to 90% of the cyber attacks that happens in the market can be blocked by a basic cybersecurity hygiene. And which means, first is to keep our platform updated. So if we will take the common ransomware attack, they are not using 0 days attack. They're using the latest vulnerabilities in our product, in the products, in the IT environment. So keeping the platform updated is one of the most important stuff. The second thing is to keep the identity hygiene. So what is identity hygiene? First, to start to use a strong authentication and multi-factor authentication, and keep my organization high privileges account safe. For example, do not allow the admin of the systems to be able to log on computers. They have internet connection, because when I'm doing a phishing, you know, the attacker, in the end of the day, wants to have access to the administrative account. And the third thing is education, because everything in the end of the day is comes to the human factor. So as I said in the beginning, 85% of the cyber attacks that we are having today in the market can be blocked by these three basic things. Unfortunately, from what we are seeing in the market, the maturity is not there. And definitely this is the points that IT and an organization needs to be focused on.
Thank you, Itzik. Heather, would you like to also add something?
Yeah, I agree with what Itzik said. More than 80% of breaches are attributable to the human factor, right? And I feel like a lot of times we talk a lot about the geopolitical landscape and the threat actors that are out there. You look at Russia, Ukraine, the war that's happening there. You look at Iran and China and things that are happening there. There's a lot of increased activity from those threat actors, but still, when it comes down to it, a majority of breaches are caused by the basic mistakes that humans make on a day-to-day basis, whether it's clicking on a malicious link, whether it's misconfiguring a cloud asset, leaving something vulnerable that we weren't aware of. That's what most attacks are a result of now. The other thing I would add to that is also the fact that threat actors aren't using malware as much anymore because they know that our systems will detect it, will quarantine it, it will never impact us. But what they're using is they're drifting to things like legitimate credentials or getting access and looking like a legitimate user so they can go undetectable by our detection and compromise system. So I think that's one trend to keep an eye out for in the basic protections that Itzik mentioned, that those are the things that are going to help prevent against those types of threats.
Nicely said, Heather. Liked it very much. Mark, would you like to shed some things from your side?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest concern I have is that we have to understand what I call the threat. Who is the threat and what are they doing? And one of the things that I see happening in the next couple of years is the use of generative AI to facilitate the aggregation, generation, and creation of what I call integrated suites of attack tools. Now you have the Chernovite group did that in ICS environment with the pipe dream tool. And I think generative AI is going to make that easier, which means that the bar of expertise necessary to use advanced attacks is going to go down. The other thing I want to point out is I think we're seeing an increase in what I call the aggressiveness and destructiveness of nation state APT groups, advanced persistent threat groups. And I think we may see a significant increase because of what's going on with the rhetoric around China and Taiwan. If the PRC decides to get even more aggressive because of the Taiwan autonomy issue, this could become a flashpoint that's even bigger and more destructive, candidly, than the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Finally, one of the biggest areas where I think we're going to see a heightened state of attacks is against cloud assets. There was an 85% increase in attacks against cloud assets. That was a CrowdStrike research that was done just over last year during 2022. I think the relative obscurity of cloud has completely gone away. You no longer benefit from what's called security by obscurity. And so as the attackers understand cloud, I think you're going to continue to see a steady and constant increase of attacks against cloud assets. And Itzik was spot on. You have to protect your cloud assets the very same way you protect your premise assets. Thank you, Oren.
Thank you very much. You've all spoken very wisely. So I want to continue on that line of thought. So given this constantly evolving threat landscape, it can be very challenging for businesses to prioritize their cybersecurity effort. So Heather, let's start with you. In your opinion, what are the top 3 things that IT professionals need to do to better protect their businesses?
Yeah, in terms of prioritization, I think that's a challenge for every security team. We all want to do more than we have the resources to practically accomplish. So I think having a really strong risk framework to drive prioritization of your security initiatives is extremely important. If you don't have the right focus and you're not focusing on the right things, people are going to spin their wheels and you're not actually going to improve your protection against attacks. So I think the first thing is having a very strong risk management program to focus and prioritize your efforts. And then again, I will say, going back to Itzik's comment at the beginning, it was a very good one. You got to nail the basics. And so many times we get so caught up in the latest trends and technologies and the latest tools, and that's all important. But if you're not patching your systems, you're not managing privileged credentials, you're not managing your secrets appropriately, those are the things that are really going to cause harm.
Agreed. Thank you. And Mark, would you like to add something?
Well, I like to use the acronym, and it's not really an acronym, it's just a saying that I use: all cowboys choose potato vittles. And those are types of managements you need to do. And it's all about reducing what I call your attack surface. Now, Itzik has already talked about this. You reduce your attack surface, but the first step is identify all your assets. The second one is you implement effective configuration management. It's much easier to manage 33 configurations than 860 devices that all have separate configurations. Configuration management, change management, so you know that you don't, as you make changes in your environment, disable your security controls. And then, of course, you have patch management. You've got to patch. He said update, you've got to patch your devices, but in the context of maintaining secure configurations and done through the process of change management. And finally, now that you've reduced your surface area as much as possible, you implement vulnerability management. And that's where you can see at least what do I have left that I couldn't fix by just common sense IT environment management. And then that allows you to put into place what are called compensating controls. Itzik said it perfectly in response to the first question, but the number one thing I do is manage my attack surface. The number two thing I do is I increase visibility. So you make it harder for them to get, past the wire. But once they're past the wire, you have to be able to see what's going on. And that's why you need endpoint detection and response, network detection and response, and then some sort of log aggregation, some sort of SIM or SOAR tool that allows you to see the entirety of your environment.
Thank you very much, Mark. So definitely, I'll agree with everyone, because as my past role as being part of the Israeli defense protecting organization, it's always about the basics. Reuse of password, which leads to everything. Not having a proper MFA, unpacked system, not even an updated antivirus. It's the basic things. So keeping a proper patch cadence is basic. Having a proper hygiene on password, it's part of reducing the attack surface. So I agree with all of you, and thank you for this. Let's continue. So cloud data breaches continue to be one of the most critical and major concern for businesses. And you've mentioned that earlier, Mark. So what are one of the biggest challenges businesses face today when securing their data in the cloud? So can you share with us, Mark? Let's start with you. What is some of the best practices for minimizing the risks in terms of protecting yourself from a breach in your cloud environment?
Yeah, thank you, Oren. So I see three principal risks. First is ensuring the most effective security configurations of your cloud-hosted assets. Second is understanding the shared responsibility model for implementing cloud security across all of your providers. And the third one, unfortunately, is having and retaining the necessary skill sets to ensure that you're able to ensure your secure cloud configuration. There is so much competition for the skill sets. Now, what I like to do to address number one is use a CSPM or a CNAP tool, Cloud Security Posture Management. There's a great one there in Israel called Wiz. You use it to track your configurations against compliance frameworks or technical security frameworks. It's wonderful. But the way you establish your configurations are to use what I call secure baselines, such as the CIS, Center for Internet Security Benchmarks. Those are awesome. The second one to address the breadth of your environment is you need to learn what you're responsible for, not just each of the vendors, AWS, GCP, Azure, Oracle Cloud, but also to understand what you need to manage if at the different levels. Is it infrastructure as a service? Is it platform as a service? Is it software as a service? Or even is it serverless? Is it function as a service? But what controls do you need to manage if you're doing those three? And then for the last challenge, which is all about retention of qualified personnel, it's a headache. It's easy to get qualified personnel in Arkansas, but you get in the Bay Area where Heather is, or you get up in Redmond, Washington, where the mothership for Itzik is, it's much more difficult to compete financially for those personnel. So competing for qualified and trained personnel is much more difficult depending on the location.
Thank you very much, Mark. Itzik, would you like to commence as well?
Yeah, so the clouds bring a lot of modernization and make the organization to be able to produce and bring more. And when organizations are shifting to the cloud, they are, building a digital transformation strategy, a data and AI strategy. But what we are seeing that the cybersecurity in sometimes are left beside. And one of I think the most important things that organization needs to do when they are starting a cloud motion is to reshape their cybersecurity strategy. Because the security, most of the organization or the employees, if you ask employees in organization, the cybersecurity are usually blockers because, the CISO, the IT tell me, do not do that, don't do this. But when you are reshaping your cybersecurity strategy, actually it's become an enabler. Now, if I'm looking on traditional on-prem, it's basically based on security perimeter. I have all the firewalls, on the protections, and it's actually protecting the on-prem or the traditional surface attack. But when we are shifting to the cloud, and the cloud, it's as Mark said, it's not a single point. You have Azure, GCP, AWS. We have a lot of software as a service vendor. So the perimeter is not working anymore. The persistency, which is one of the vectors in cyber attacks. If I'm looking on SaaS, software as a service, and platform as a service, we do not have persistency there. So the area that I want to protect my environment or shaping my cybersecurity strategy is need to be changed. For example, when I'm consuming a software as a service or platform as a service, the focal point should be more on identity, because a lot says, again, the identity is the new perimeter, but in the end of the day, we need to really implement these sentences and embed it in my cybersecurity strategy. Also, application vulnerabilities. It's one of the major attack vectors today, because when my application sits in the on-prem, it's in my safe zone. But when it's in the exposed outside and not in under my under my head, the attackers now starting to look for misconfiguration. Maybe my developer forgot the access token hard-coded in the application. So a lot of things now shifting from the on-prem infrastructure to the application layer, to the misconfiguration. So basically, the cloud brings a lot of modernization. Also in the cybersecurity, the organization needs to do adaptation to the cybersecurity strategy to contain and also enjoy from the modernization of the cloud.
Thank you very much, Itzik. So let's continue. Ransomware attack, as we all know, have become more sophisticated and difficult to detect. So what are the common ransomware TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures that businesses today need to be aware of? So, dear panelists, please share with us what are your strategies that SMBs and ITDs can use to stay ahead of the game and protect their organizations and customers from ransomware attack. Heather, would you like to start?
Sure. I think for me, the biggest trend we're seeing with ransomware attacks right now is really the shift from asking for money to data extortion, right? Criminals have learned, like with the US sanctions on Russia, companies are not paying out ransoms. The US government's guidance is to not pay out ransoms, and insurance companies are less willing to pay out ransoms to cyber criminals. So what this has done is it's forced these criminals to take your data and use that for monetization versus holding your data for a monetary ransom. So I think that's really the biggest shift I've seen with ransomware. In terms of protections, it's, again, I hate to keep repeating it, but it's going back to the basics. You have to have very strong endpoint security in building that security security footprint from the inside out. And you have to prepare for these types of attacks because inevitably you're going to have gaps, issues are going to happen, and you have to exercise your response plans for that. So you need to have dedicated run books for how you would respond to and contain a ransomware attack. And then you need to practice it because you don't want to be running through that for the first time when you're in the midst of a major ransomware attack. So exercising that on a regular basis and making sure you're taking your lessons learned and constantly improving on those.
Amazing, Heather. I couldn't say it better, really. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mark, would you like to add?
Yeah, I would like to just add one more thing, and that's internal visibility. We have to accept that you understand there's 14 categories in the MITRE attack framework for the TTPs. And the last one is the exploitation, where they take action on objective. And the first three are reconnaissance, and then noodling around tool development, and then you get initial access. The initial access turns into execution, but between execution and action on objective, you have 9 TTPs, and those include persistence, privilege escalation, defensive evasion, you have credential access, all the way to command and control. And in all of those, the attacker needs to be able to move inside your network and not be seen. And that's where the advantage shifts to the defenders. So if there's, let's protect the perimeter with endpoint defense and by reducing your attack surface. But some are using supply chain attacks, some are using zero-day exploits. You've always got the stupid human that does the stupid human things and allows the phishing attacks in. So understanding that you can't always stop them at execution or initial access, the defense in depth concept, and that's where visibility gets you, and that's why you need to be able to see inside your network using an NDR tool. You need to be able to see your logical objects, like a tool like Varonis that sees changes in your credentials and changes in the access to your file directory structures and individual files. And what we need to, the big thing we need to understand is that the current crop of ransomware actors are resembling more and more the nation state actors. Nation state actors have what's called the APT, the Advanced Persistent Threat. Well, currently, the current ransomware actors, they're the AET, the Advanced Extortionate Threat. And Heather nailed it when she said that they're now using the data that they steal through exfiltration as a way to generate money, because guess what? The insurance companies aren't paying anymore. So between the 0 days supply chain and deperimeterization, we no longer have a perimeter around our network. The solution, I believe, is visibility. And then, as Heather so eloquently put it, be prepared and have your run books ready, not for when there's action on objective or exfiltration, but when you see defensive evasion and you see all of these indicators in your network with those middle 9 categories of the MITRE attack framework. Thank you, Oren.
Thank you very, very much, Mark. Itzik, would you want to add some of your input to this?
Yeah, so if I'm looking on the ransomware since the COVID, okay, so ransomware become the most growing crime, on top of drugs, money laundering, weapons, and it's actually it's an economy model. So the cost of attack versus the cost of defense. Therefore, ransomware attackers or ransomware groups are now shifted into targeted attack, which means they are focusing on an organization and try to breach their defense wall and then to execute the ransomware attack. Now, these attacks are very similar to, if we can call a regular attack, because in the end of the day, the attacker needs to access the customer environment and then to execute the attack. So from protective perspectives, there is no difference between cyber attacks and other attacks. The difference is again, if an attacker wants to attack a customer today, for example, a bank or a hospital, unfortunately, from what we are seeing, most of the attack are succeeded, even if the customer has a very good and mature defense wall. And that's because, again, what he's talking here is monetization. Okay, in the end of the day, it's producing a lot of money for the attacker. So if I'm looking on customer, and my advice for customers is first, let's try to reduce or to make the bar more higher for the cost of the attacker. So as much as Mark says, use an XDR and protect your identity. So make the attacker understand that probably if they want to attack you, they will have to raise the cost of the attack. The other thing is to defend the cyber attack for cyber ransomware, starting a lot of time before the attack is happening. And the idea is to short the time that takes to organization to recover from ransomware attack. Therefore, the organization needs to invest in the recovery procedures, to take to validate that they are backing correctly their data, that their infrastructure are segmented. So if the organization is under ransomware, I will be able to recover in very fast way my infrastructure. So there's a lot of work the organization needs to do before they are, can say, ready to ransomware attack, and also in the time that those attacks are happened, as the same as Mark and Heather said before. Now,
thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you for this, Itzik. So I'll share my 2 cents on this matter. I think that my experience is that hackers are have the similar behavior as water. They try to find the easiest path. So by having the easiest path means you left an exposed RDP, email open without an MFA or anything else. So most attacks are a spray attack. And if they manage to get you, they aren't targeted. Most of the attacks we've seen in the last few years, and the current statistics is thousands of attacks happen daily. This means that if you manage, as Heather, Mark, and all of you said quite diligently, is to have a proper hygiene. So having a proper security, care will thwart most of those simple attacks, but not against ADPs, which are much more stronger. Those advanced persistent threat actors will get you if they want to. So this is my 2 cents on this. Let's continue. So in today, cybersecurity regulations are evolving and they have an impact on businesses. So my question to you, dear panelists, how can businesses comply with cybersecurity regulations, also while maintaining operational efficiency? Heather, I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, this is an area that's very near and dear to my heart. Joining Zoom in January of 2021, in 2021 and 2022, it's just massive growth for Zoom, and we're constantly expanding into new markets and new regions and having to comply with new laws, obtain new certifications and attestations in order to be able to deliver our services in certain markets. So one of the things that was incredibly important for us was to make sure we had a really strong baseline controls framework. And so we call it our common controls framework. We take a risk-based approach. The way I look at compliance is, you shouldn't ever be trying to check that compliance box, but if you're managing your risks appropriately and you're implementing the right protections, implementing the right controls, you're going to be doing the right things, and you're going to comply with probably 90% of the requirements out there. There are frameworks that have very specific nuanced requirements that you may not hit, but at least you can get to kind of that 90% confidence level. So that was extremely critical for us. I think we had 2 certifications and attestations at that time, and now we have over 20 audits that we do every year. So we have to make sure that we are you don't want to be a burden to your business stakeholders by auditing them 20 different times a year. So how do we audit our business stakeholders once and leverage that across all of the different audits that we have? The other piece that's been really critical for us is automation and being able to automatically pull in that evidence that you need for audits, so we don't have to, again, go out and manually ask people for that evidence. So how do we demonstrate compliance proactively instead of reactively? And I think you're seeing a trend. I think it's going to continue to, this trend is going to continue where we're seeing more and more governments get more and more prescriptive about cybersecurity requirements. You look in the EU, everybody knows the EU for GDPR and privacy requirements. They now have the NIS2 directive that just went into place. It's being transposed into law right now, but those set out some very specific security requirements. They've proposed the Cyber Resilience Act for software supply chain. That's going to be very prescriptive as well if that gets passed. So you're seeing a trend towards more and more prescriptive security measures from government entities, but also the private sector is looking to what governments are doing. So if you want to do business, even in the private sector, you're going to have to start meeting those very specific requirements laid out by various international governments. So it's not an easy thing to do, but I think just making sure that you're taking a risk-based approach, you're trying to hit as many different frameworks as you can when implementing your common controls, that's going to make you much more efficient.
Thank you for this amazing insight. Mark, I'd love to hear what your thoughts on this.
Well, Heather's already answered the question. I had risk management approach, and she gave that answer to the very first question you asked. And then she said automation. You have to automate, and you have to approach everything from a risk management framework, because that's the only way you're going to get money from the CFO. You have to be able to articulate that we are reducing corporate risk. And by reducing corporate risk, we're making our enterprise more competitive. If the board and the CFO and the CEO see you as a cost center, you've already lost the battle. So you have to take a risk management approach, and you have to be able to articulate, well, we have financial risk, we have technical risk, we have non-compliance risk. That non-compliance risk can translate into financial risk. If you have to make that argument, you've lost. You need to start with the risk management approach, as Heather just said, and as she said in answer to the first question. But of course, automation. You need it. If you have SaaS tools, you need SSPM. If you have a multi-cloud environment, very pervasive cloud environment, you need Terraform, you need Wiz. There's all these things you need to implement to make the job easier so you can actually manage all those controls that Heather mentioned.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was very educational. So for our final question, so complying with cybersecurity regulations often requires significant investment in PPT, people, process, and technology. So in your perspective, how can businesses balance the need for compliance from one side with the need for operational efficiency on the otherwise? And what are the strategies that you can provide for our customers and audience to optimize their cybersecurity operations to minimize their day-to-day business disruption? Itzik, would you like to start?
Yeah, I will start a little bit with the perspective for my, my daily work. I'm working with customers, and a lot of customers and companies, SMBs, and even enterprises are look on regulations as a blocker. Here is the government puts me new stuff. But if we are looking on cybersecurity regulation, in the end of the day, it comes to protect, my end users, because I wanted my end user will feel comfortable to save his data in my platform or to use my customer platforms. So therefore, we need to think positively on cybersecurity regulation. Now, a lot of my customers, like they're using a technology platform to achieve more with their core business. They said, listen, my core business is finance, my core business is manufacturing, my core business is insurance. Security is not in my core business. I do not understand security, and we talked in the beginning of this on what are the 3 things that that customers need to do in cybersecurity. I'm taking the regulation to the same way. If the organization are, and it's okay not to understand in cybersecurity, we're not expecting from everyone to understand it. The way to balance between the regulation and your core business is it's okay to do outsource for someone that helps you in MSSP, a managed security service provider, that help you with the regulations, and also what we talked in the beginning of the discussion, that it's really connect one-to-one to the cybersecurity regulation. Because if you look on the most common regulations, they are talking about keep your system update, monitoring, endpoint protection, identity. So it's all come together in one way. And if it's not your core business, and that's what happens today on the one of the reasons for the low maturity in the market, everyone try to resolve it by themselves. No, if it's not your core business, if you want to have a healthy balance between your regulation and your normal operation, organization like MSSP or managed IT are definitely can help you.
Thank you very much, Itzik. Heather, any words?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to what's been said is I think, it's really important to have strong partnerships with all parts of the business. So it's really important if you're trying to justify an investment in complying with a certain cybersecurity regulation or certain certification framework that's going to help open new markets and industries for you. You have to be in lockstep with your sales team, and you have to work with them to make those business cases, make that justification to finance. There's been many times where like you put the business case together, here's how much it's going to cost, here's how much effort it's going to take. And sometimes it's worth it and sometimes it's not. And you have to just come back and revisit it later. So it goes back to that prioritization and to the points Mark made about, needing to justify the investment in seeing security, not as a cost center, but really as a business enabler. And a lot of times that's easier said than done, but this is one of those areas where I think security can really be viewed as a business enabler. We can help open up more revenue by complying with laws and regulations in new geographies, and by, getting certifications, attestations that are going to open the doors to new markets or industries for us as well.
I couldn't agree more, because I believe that those frameworks that you've mentioned quite efficiently, achieving 20 of them, really opens the door for Zoom everywhere. And that is a strong approach that I think everybody should embrace. Mark, any final words on this?
Yeah, thank you, Oren. So I had 4 words written down. I had automation, and of course, Heather has already talked about automation. No need to beat that to death. Outsourcing, Itzik has already mentioned outsourcing, so you can get some efficiencies by outsourcing rather than trying to do everything yourself. Automation reduces the amount of time it takes your people to do it. I think training and awareness is also a huge, because the fewer stupid human things that people do inside your environment, the less you have to respond to, and the more you can keep hardening rather than reacting. And the last one, I think Heather, implied it, and that's the partnerships. You find when you're in a security or a CISO type position, even a risk management position, you have to be able to understand exactly what product is doing and exactly what engineering is doing, exactly what enterprise IT is doing, exactly what sales is doing. And so you need to be able to understand where the next step is, because you can get ahead of protecting it. You can get ahead of making sure that the product, I'm sure Heather sees this with Zoom, you got to make sure that the next iteration of the product is secure, so you're not fighting a fire after the fact. So get ahead of what the organization's doing so that it reduces the amount of unnecessary swirl.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm a very strong believer in the human firewall, and I believe that's a very strong line of defense. I would like to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart. Heather, Mark, Itzik, really, thank you very much. And I hope today's conversation, dear viewers, had shed some light what both small businesses and enterprise are doing and what you need to do to fortify your security. So thank you all for joining us here today. And please stick around for the next sessions with partner spotlights, both from Malwarebytes and Bitdefender. So, but before we let you go, please feel free to take a mental break for a few minutes, to refill your coffee cup and roam the sponsor booth. Thank you very much. Looking forward.